Hello and welcome. This is Jim Cobman, Rank in Technical College. Today's lecture is going to be about the authorization, and we're also going to go ahead and walk through Lab 04-02, which is all about authorization, roles, and permissions. So we'll spend some time walking through that. As far as the authorization lecture, we're not going to. I got some lecture material. We're only going to really just touch upon some things. Some of the stuff in there is really not all that relevant for us, so I don't want to spend too much time on that today. So as far as authorization is about basically granting or denying permissions to your users or to anything that's logging in. It could be besides just a physical the user could be a system, or the user could be a human person, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a human doing it. For our purposes, for what we'll be doing, basically it's going to be people logging in, right? You, yourself, and me for the most part for your application, but potentially others as well, right? So authorization is different from authentication. Authorization is all about roles and permissions. Where authentication, which we talked about yesterday, is basically the process of proving your identity. Are you who you say you are? Okay. Now, I think it's really important for you to be able to understand these concepts a little bit, and not just for this course, but when you go to an interview, you need to be prepared to explain what authentication is. What is, what is authorization, and how did you implement that? How did you go about that? Right. So you need to really be prepared for that. It's very important. So authorization is the process of determining if you have permission to perform an action or view some data, etc. So authorization requires authentication. First, before you can determine, right? Before you can give somebody permission, you must know who they are. Their permissions are tied to their identity. So, when someone logs in, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be storing that data, so then we can grab that to see, hey, does this person, do we have somebody who logged in successfully? Can we get the authentication object, right? We get the authentication object, and inside that authentication object, we're going to have some permissions, and we'll have to check to see if those permissions exist. If they exist for certain actions, they can go ahead and perform those actions or view that data. So we're going to be, continuing with the middleware. It's kind of continuation of like what we did yesterday, obviously. And like I just said, before you can really do the authorization, you have to be authenticated first. So you really, you don't want to do this lab that we're going to be walking through here today until you take care of the authentication piece from the 04.01 lab. But as far as middleware, we're going to be using the same middleware. And here, this is important. So basically, when someone's not authenticated, pretty much the correct status code to use is what's called not authorized or not authenticated, and that would be a 401. Whereas authorization is about you don't have permissions, right? You don't have permissions, so you're not authorized, and that would be a status 403, which is also from a status code definition perspective is called forbidden, and we'll take a look at that here in a minute. But this is just basically how our middleware works. Your request comes in, you're going to be authenticated. If you pass authentication, then you're going to have a product. We will merge a bunch of permissions onto your on your token, and that will be all your permissions that you can use. Okay, that's your authorization. And then we use what's called kind of a route handler that's going to be internal within the middleware, and we'll return the response, right? So So real quick on status codes. You know, the ones that, we're very used to are, 20, for successful responses. And we've done a lot in the 400 area and 500 as well. Okay. There's lots of different status codes. Obviously, the 200 is okay. The request is succeeded. We're very familiar with that one. Let's see here. So 400 is considered a bad request, and we've used that already. When like we were sending data from Postman to our application, and when that data was incorrect, right? That data was incorrect, missing something or whatever. That's when we would use a 400 bad request error, right? 404 is basically the page isn't found, right? 404 could be a resource, and it can be more than a page. It could be basically a user's not found, 404, whatever. Not always use that one, but 404 is usually for you're trying to find some resource, it's not available, and you get a 404 not found. Like I was just mentioned, 401 for unauthorized. Let's see. Standard says unauthorized systematic response unauthenticated. Yeah. So really, yeah, you need to look at 401 being unauthenticated. It's probably bad that it says that like that. That's okay. But basically, you're not authenticated for the system. You're not authorized. And what it means is you're not authorized to access the system. Okay, you're not authorized to access the system. So authentication, authentication and authorization works, really hand in hand there. And from this perspective is basically you're not authorized to even use the system. Not what can you even do in that system, but you're not authorized to use the system at all. If you're authenticated, right, to use the system, then you're authorized to use the system. So 401 would basically be if you're unauthorized because you're not authenticated, right? 403 is forbidden, and forbidden is you don't have access to certain resources, right? You're forbidden, right? The client does not have access rights to the content. So basically, he's unauthorized. So the server is refusing to give the requested resource. Okay, so that is 403 forbidden. All right. So here's the basic ones that we see most of the time. And the ones to stand out is obviously 200's okay. Bad request is 400. Not found is 404. Here, basically, we're stating client must be authenticated. If he's not, it's a 401 error. A 403 error is forbidden. User does not have permission to access the resource. Okay, that's kind of interesting there. Okay, not that we're going to be seeing that, but there's lots of other status codes as well. But the ones I was pointing out so far, are going to be very relevant to what we're doing. And then obviously 500 internal server error. All right, I'm not going to, a lot of this isn't necessary. Some of this is a little bit older from our perspective. So I think that's about all I'm going to cover here. We keep it kind of light on this authorization stuff for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and start looking at this lab. So this is another continuation of issue tracker. So here, and got to keep in mind that these labs kind of build on each other, and it'll actually kind of ask you to be changing some things along the way too, right? We, kind of like at the beginning, we just used an array of users, number one, we gave it an ID of number one, number two, number three. We just had this array before we even had access to the database, right? So then we upgraded that to the database. So, throughout this process, we're kind of updating things here and there, okay? And, you may have to go in and create some new users or some new bugs or whatever just to get things to sync up and in line, right? because and it's going to kind of morph and change throughout the course here. So as far as this lab goes, users can have roles such as developer, business analyst, quality analyst, product manager, and technical manager. And obviously, you can have some of your own roles if you would like as well. But a lot of these requirements here are kind of really based on these kinds of roles. Okay, so you're going to have to at least have these. If you want some other ones, that's fine as well. So number 2, anonymous users can register for account, but do not receive a role initially. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look at this a little bit here in a little bit. Once we kind of get things set up, I want to kind of go through this one here because what's going to happen is, when we originally did the register from like Postman and that, we selected a role. I think in our schema, we made that required. Well, we're going to have to make that optional, and only the person who can actually register a new user. I think a technical manager can, but the technical manager can assign a role. Okay, only technical managers can assign a role, and it says that here in a little bit. So right here, technical managers can assign roles to users. Okay, so basically a person can come in, an anonymous, won't have to be logged in, right? Come into the register and can go ahead and create a role. Create a new user, register themselves, but they cannot assign a role. Okay, the technical manager will have to come in and edit and to add a role. But I do believe also a technical manager should be able to come in and register a user as well. And he should be able to add a role as well. All data is viewable by any role. I'm not going to just kind of read through all of these. I'm going to point out some of the ones really important for right now. I guess that's really about it. Most of the other stuff are bugs. So, okay, so here, step 1 says make a table. Well, this is actually the table. Originally, this assignment, kind of morphed over some semesters a little bit. So it's obviously changed throughout throughout the semesters. And originally, it just kind of had, there was part of the student's responsibility to make the table. Well, this is basically the table. If you want to change some things, you want it to be a little different, that is fine, right? But you kind of have to it's much easier, I guess, just to kind of use what's already here, right? So we're going to actually we're going to go ahead and create roles in a database, and we're going to basically use this table. And you can see how the technical manager has some certain permissions that others don't, can edit any user, can assign roles. Them are the 2 big ones there. As far as test cases are concerned, down here at the bottom, the QA can do that. A lot of others cannot mess with the test cases, only the QA. Anybody can do comments. And let's see, the developer can be assigned login hours, applying fixes, putting the version date in there. So there's some things that only the developer can do as well. BA can close the bug, can classify, reassign, and then BA can only do those. So we take all these permissions, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and show you here. So what you can do here is create 5 different ones. One for developer, one for quality analyst, business analyst, product manager, and technical manager. And so what I have here is, let me show you this. So I'm just basically, new collection called roles. And I have an insert many. So I have one for each one of these, the developer, QA, quality analyst, etc. And what I'm doing here is basically taking that table and putting this in here And so either you're going to have a true or false on each one of these. Okay, true or false on each one of these. And then you kind of just go through each one. So you just follow what's in that table. You know, once you do one of these, you can copy this all over to the next role. This one's developer. You can copy that over to this one, and then just change which one's false, which one's true, and do that for each one of these. So you have your developer, you've got your QA, you've got your BA here, you have your product manager, and you have your technical manager. Okay. So I just have insert many for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab all of these. And I'm going to copy this so we can just insert this right in the database. So I'm going to come over here, and obviously yours is going to be whatever, like cluster 0, I think was the default. I've been doing some different things, so you know, I kind of named mine a little different. Yours is probably cluster 0 because I think that was the default there. Kind of already had this open. Let me refresh here. Roles I think is empty. And that's fine. We want that to be empty. So basically in here to review, if you want to go ahead and use the shell, you can just go ahead and up here. You have to do it on your cluster, right? You can't do it down here or anything. You have to do it on your cluster. Click on your shell here. And then here I'm going to use issue tracker 2. Now this is obviously whatever you called yours. Yours is probably just issue tracker like that. You might have had a hyphen in between issue or tracker, different things. I have more than one issue tracker here, so I have mine like that. So you just want to make sure you do that. And then you want to make sure you switch to that database. This has got to be your database where you have your users and your bugs. Okay, and then in here, I'm just going to go ahead and do a Control V to paste and hit enter. And then insert it all for each ID for each one of these, and each one is a role, right? And let's go ahead and let's refresh here. Let's just click on roles, right? And I can up here just realize this doesn't refresh until you refresh it. So I'm going to come up here at the top up here, and then there's this little refresh. I'm going to click that, and then here's all your, for each role. So here's your different permissions. Okay, here's your each of your permissions for each of those roles. And we'll be using this here in a little bit. Now the next thing you really want to do, you can decide how you want to do this. You know, you can create a script. You can come in here and create a new one as well. You know, you can add data, however you, if you're comfortable with using creating your records in here, that's fine. But what's going to kind of be important here for the users, and you already have some users, is you're going to want ones with the correct roles, or you can go ahead and edit your own as well, right? You can go ahead through Postman and edit it, right? And these actually, I created these. I just used, I blew away all my users, and I just created them using register. So I registered them and added the role. So I added the correct role for like all of those: developer, business analyst, quality analyst, product manager, and technical manager. Okay. So obviously, if you want some other additional roles, that's fine. That's up to you. I did mine all lowercase. Not that you necessarily have to, but you have to be careful when you're doing things that you're either what you're expecting. You know, if you're comparing it or that, you need to make sure you're comparing it correctly. You don't want to have camel case on something and all lowercase. So you just need to kind of be careful with that, unless you're going to do a 2 lowercase or 2 uppercase or whatever for comparisons and things like that. So I just kind of left it all lowercase. It doesn't matter. This can be, you know, you can make the first letter of each uppercase. You know, that's up to you. Just something to kind of keep an eye on. If something's not working, you need to make sure you look at that. All right. So there's my users. and I have roles for each one of these. I have permissions, I should say. This probably shouldn't be called, maybe, these are the roles, but, they're actually the permissions of the roles, right? So, all right. So we have that now. If we have our database set up for this lab. Now, let's come down here. So here's another table, and obviously it says make a table. This table's already there. You can just use this table, right? You don't have to make a table. Maybe I'll go ahead and reword that. But some of your routes might be different. I mean, I know they are, because I've been grading the homework, and it's okay. It's okay to have different names for your routes. Then it don't have to be exactly like here. But you still have to do the basic functionality. You still have to be able to get all users. You need to be able to edit a user. You need to be able to do that. If you got your routes a little different, that's fine. You just have to keep that in mind here, okay? So it's showing you a permission that needs to be on some of these specific routes here. Can view data. So this one here is basically the user list. So for the user list, you don't want, especially a user could come in, and we're going to think from the front end perspective. Once we have a front end and we have a form that a user can come in and create their own account. So they're basically unauthorized from the beginning, right? They don't have an authorization. They're anonymous, right? But they can come in and from an anonymous standpoint and create themselves as a user, right? So they create themselves as a user, but even though they do that, you want to make sure you control those other routes so that they can't come in and now if a user comes in and creates themselves an account, then they just go ahead and view all the data. You need to put some things in place to prevent them from doing that. They're not authorized to do that at this point, right? So we're doing can view data. So do they have that permission? So and then for a new user is not going to have a role. Okay, so they're not going to be, since they don't have a role, they're not going to have any permissions. So if this is on there, this is going to prevent them from viewing data. Okay, it's going to prevent them from viewing data, and we'll take a look at that. So these are the different ones that we can put right there on the function itself, kind of like we did yesterday when we did the is logged in. All right. I'm not going to go through each one of these right now. So we added our roles to the database. We got that. I have users added that have the correct role. And now we're going to go ahead and look at some code. Let me grab the right thing here. All right. So, quick review of what we did kind of yesterday here. Yeah. I did make a change to, I don't think I have this reflected here. That's okay though. I did make some changes to that zip file, just a couple things so that there's some of the logging statements were kind of incorrect, and I wanted that to be correct. But they're not correct on my version here, but that's okay. Let's see here. What am I doing? So just to kind of review what we did yesterday, because you're going to have to make sure that you have the authentication part in place before you can do the authorization part. Okay. So we went ahead and created the middleware folder, and we unzipped the auth permissions in there. And then in our user.js file, no, actually in our index.js file, we included the cookie parser. We included basically all of this. Okay, included all of this in our index.js file. And I believe that's all we did. Yes. And then within our user.js file, we imported our JWT token. Obviously, we did our install. We did the install. We did the MP install for the JSON web token and also for the cookie parser. I think it also had the one for bcrypt that we already had anyhow, though. And we went ahead and imported is logged in just so we could see that if it is logged in. But we're going to make some changes here on this. So let's see, what else did we do here? Down at the bottom here, we did the issue auth token and issue auth cookie. So I think what we'll go ahead and do here is work on this issue auth token. And we're going to have to make some changes here. Maybe first here, let's import our things from our middleware. So let's just go take a quick look at these. And so here was our different ones for our middleware. We need this for just initialization type stuff. Then we have is logged in, has role, have these different ones here. We're going to be using fetched roles and purged permissions when we issue our token. So we're going to need those. So what we're going to go ahead and do here, let me close this so I don't get this confused with the other one. Let's go ahead here at the top. Let's go ahead and import all of those. So I'm importing fetched roles, merge permissions, is logged in, has permission for now. There's a couple more there that we may need later, has role, etc. But that is fine for what we need now. So did that. What we're also going to have to do here is we're going to have to create another, we're going to have to get our roles from the roles collection. So we're going to do a get role by name, okay? And then that's going to be from our database.js file. And then in here, just go ahead and come here to the bottom, I guess, close to the bottom, maybe before the ping here. And we're going to go ahead and we want to do a get role by name. Roles. So obviously make sure that the collection's the correct collection, what you called yours. If you just call it role or something, I know some students have done some different things and it's fine. Just have to make sure that you have them correct. So here's the get role by name. And it's basically just going to go ahead and grab that whole, grab all of that from the database, right? Based on the name. All right. And we want to also get role by name here. So we want to come back down here and let's go ahead and add that one here. All right. So we have that. Okay, and this is our user. So when we create our token down here, we're going to do something a little different. make some changes, so to speak. So when we issue our auth token, so basically just kind of a quick, what we have to do is add these permissions. Okay, we have these other, but we want to add these permissions. So that token is going to hold on to those permissions from request to request. It's going to be stored in that cookie, like we look at. Obviously, when we have a front end with the browser, it's going to be stored there as well, but we're just using Postman for now. So in Postman, the cookie is going to hold on to those permissions, right, in this auth token. And just to kind of, I know we kind of vaguely talked about this, but there's the idea of a payload, right? A payload's all the data that you're basically carrying along with it, right? Taking away the payload. And so we want to add permissions to the payload here. So for us to add permissions, what we're going to need to do is first we're going to have to get all the roles from the database. Let me grab what I have over here on that. So we're going to grab all of that. So basically what I'm doing here is get role by name. This is the database function that we just created, right? Passing in the role. Here's fetch roles. This is part of the middleware, okay? So we're passing that into the fetch roles, okay? And then it's going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and display that out so we can see that. Then what we're going to want to do from there is what's called merge. We're going to do the merge permissions. Okay. So we have the roles. Now we want the permissions. So we basically take our merge permissions, pass in the user and the roles. Okay. And it's going to it's going to merge that together. Okay. It's going to merge that together. We'll go ahead and print that out for now. It'll be very verbose in the log though, but that's okay. All right, and then the other thing we're going to need to do here is, like I was saying, we're going to have to, we can get that out of the way. Here we're going to have to also add those permissions to our payload. So we'll do that here. Permissions. Okay, that looks good. I think that looks good to me. Role equals user role, and then permissions. I think we're going to be fine with that. Don't think we have to change anything in the cookie. We're just passing in whatever we have. I think we're good with the cookie. All right. So let's come in here and let's change this to let's just wait right now. Let's see if everything works before I do anything more. All right, so I'm going to go terminal, new terminal. And I'm going to start this up. Hopefully it starts without a problem. It looks like it did. Okay. So the first thing I guess I need to do here, let me open up Postman. All right. So I hit send here. It's probably going to say I'm not logged in, which I expect. You're not logged in. That's good. So let's go to all right. Let me I need to grab a user here. So did I have, let me grab Sandy there. Okay. Sandy Jones, hit send. Welcome back. Okay, so she logged in successfully. We have our cookie. And as you kind of notice, well, that's what, here's our auth token. Our auth token got a lot longer. If you kind of noticed yesterday, it was, even though there's, quite a few characters, a lot longer now, right? A lot more because we got all our permissions in here also, okay? So we have a lot more data encrypted in here, right?